guys, my name is Yasmin, but everybody calls me Yaya, and today we are going to get right into all of the unfair and bizarre immigration policies that the United States has seen, in my humble opinion. We're going to go way back to early America up until modern times, and of course touch on what we're seeing today. And I'll be talking about all of this while I create this look. So let's take it back to early America, okay? John Adams in 1798 implemented something called the Aliens and Immigration Sedition Act of 1798, which required citizens to be residents of the United States for 14 years instead of the old standard, which was for them to be citizens for 5 years, and also authorized the deportation of any immigrants who seemed dangerous. And it created an atmosphere of fear amongst immigrants, specifically targeting Irish and French immigrants. And this act also allowed for the imprisonment of anyone who seemed dangerous if they were from like a hostile nation. Okay, so at this time, a lot of uprisings and revolutions were happening all over Europe. Specifically in France, there was unrest in Ireland, and there was this like lingering fear that this energy was going to come to America. Okay, and on top of that, it was speculated that Spain and France were trying to expand their empires on American soil. So with all of this happening and a lot of immigrants kind of seeking refuge in the United States, you can only imagine what the reaction was, and it was really no different from what we see today. So basically all of the hostility that you see now was basically present at that time as well. One Federalist, for example, whose name was Noah Webster, he summed up pretty much what a lot of people believed. Well, maybe specifically from his party, he was a Federalist, and he summed up the overall sentiments towards immigrants by saying that for every one well-behaved immigrant, America was receiving at least 3 or 4 discontented or factious men, which basically just means rebellious people, rebellious men. And keep in mind, they were talking about white men at the time, so this wasn't like a racial thing. This was genuinely a response to all of the immigration and just the overall sentiments behind the chaos happening in Europe and just the fear of it coming to the United States. Okay, and this fear was strong enough to pass laws like the immigration law, the Aliens and Sedition Act of 1798. Okay, now moving on to the late 1800s, America saw its first law that banned immigration based off of nationality, or limited immigration based off of solely nationality. And this was in the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which was signed by the Chester Arthur administration. And this act prevented or prohibited Chinese laborers from entering the United States. And it also denied existing Chinese residents to become citizens of the United States. And this actually went on for a while. In fact, it went on for 20 years, and then in 1902, the law was signed and made permanent and extended, and lasted for many years after that. Now, this was very significant because in the 1850s, Chinese immigrants made up a large portion of the gold mine workers, and they were actually amongst the first to do so, work in those gold mines. And they also took agricultural jobs, and they did a bunch of factory work. And Chinese immigrants were also particularly instrumental in building American railroads, specifically in the West Coast. And when these laborers became successful, they would become entrepreneurs, and more Chinese laborers came to America, and many Americans just did not like that. Okay, now you can probably already imagine what people were saying then because of what people say now. They were scared that these Chinese immigrants were taking all of these American jobs, and some would even go as far as saying that Chinese immigrants were going to compromise the American race, which is hilarious considering Americans are a bunch of immigrants pretty much. But that's what people were saying then, and who's that really shocking? Probably no one. Okay, and then we have World War I, when the Immigration Act of 1917 was introduced. And this began the practice of mandatory literacy tests for immigrants and an increase on taxes on immigrants who were coming to the US. And at this time, immigration laws continued to reinforce prohibition against Asian immigrants, but all of that was nothing compared to the Immigration Act of 1924. And they decided that only 2% of every population that was in the consensus at the time. So like 2% of Asians, 2% of Mexicans, 2% of whoever else was coming in. They decided like, okay, only 2% of these immigrants are allowed here now. So we're just gonna lower that number. Whatever we allowed before then, only 2% of that can come in here, and they're gonna be subject to literacy tests, and they have to pay more taxes. And this was their way of making America great by looking back at when America was thriving, and people were building railroads and striking gold, and they decided we want to only limit that to 2% now of each population, because I guess America was thriving too much, and America doesn't like that. And they also decided that probably the most proactive group, which were Asian immigrants, now can, instead of it being 2% of that population, only 0% can come to the United States. And that was the Immigration Act of 1924. Okay, so if you're still following, you kind of see a pattern here already, right? Like America starts to have an influx of immigrants coming into the country, and people start to panic and start to say all these crazy things when they notice that the immigrants are like really doing their thing in America, or that there's a big number of immigrants, and fear begins to drive a lot of decision making in the United States. And this didn't change during the Cold War era. And during this era, the Eisenhower administration launched Operation Wetback of 1954, and that conducted mass deportation of Mexican immigrants this time. And it also implemented really aggressive border immigration policies, and it required U.S. employers to ensure that their employees were in fact citizens and not immigrants. And it completely banned and made it illegal for any U.S. employer to knowingly hire people who were not citizens. Okay, now then we fast forward to modern times, and we notice an increase of hostility against Muslim immigrants, and continue to see that against Latino, specifically Mexican immigrants, and immigrants from other Latin American countries. We see Trump implementing policies like the Remain policies, which force asylum seekers, who are basically people who just come to the United States seeking asylum, right, or seeking refuge. They are forced to wait inside their home countries that they're trying to escape for their immigration status to be legal, for them to be citizens, and they're forced to wait there because of these new immigration policies. There's also the family separation policy at the US-Mexico border, which sounds just like the name, which tragically tears apart people's families and other undocumented immigrants. And just plenty of hostile bans and regulations that are very openly targeted against Muslim communities and Muslim countries. And it doesn't seem like that's going to change anytime soon, so long as the Trump administration is in office. But the point of this video is to give light of all the times when immigration was treated in the same way that the Trump administration is doing so as well. So I hope that you kind of got some insight while you watch me get ready. And I really want to know what you guys think of those policies, where you think the United States is heading with its current immigration policies, and any suggestions you might have for what the US can be doing instead of what it's doing now. If you guys like this video, please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, all sources in the comments.